Welcome to Deal Us In, a podcast brought to you by McGuireWoods. Deal Us In promotes the advancement of women in private equity and finance through conversations with women in the private equity and finance space. These conversations provide both insights and practical takeaways to inform your deal work and enhance the culture of your organization. If you're ready to drive the industry toward a more inclusive and diverse environment, then it's time to come to the table.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to McGuireWoods podcast, Deal Us In, hosted by McGuireWoods Women in Private Equity and Finance Initiative. Today, we have a special guest where we will be focusing on impact investing. I'm Penny Zacharias, a debt finance partner in the firm's Pittsburgh office, and with us today is Hannah Schiff from Developing World Markets. Hannah, in order to get started, I'm going to turn it over to you so you can tell us just a little bit about yourself.
Great. Thank you so much, Penny. It's really wonderful to be on the podcast. I think this is a fantastic series, and I'm pleased to be a part of it. As you said, I work at Developing World Markets, or at DWM, which is an impact investing fund manager. We focus exclusively on emerging markets, hence the kind of developing markets, focus of the name. And we invest through private credit. Primarily, we did have a couple of private equity funds as well in our history. And the focus of our work is really around expanding access to basic services, financial services, renewable energy, and we have a particular emphasis on low-income women entrepreneurs around the world. I got into this work starting out actually in international development and sort of made my way into impact investing from there over the past 20 years or so.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that introduction and for telling us a little bit about what initially drew you to the field. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that and what keeps you passionate about it today.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I did start out in international development, and over the course of a few years working in that space, realized that there was really a lot more resources out there in the private sector and through the capital markets that could complement the work that philanthropy and international aid does. I was especially interested in directing capital through investments in local entrepreneurs who really knew their own communities and how to solve their problems. And so I pivoted through my graduate school into looking at social enterprise approaches and impact investing. And then I started working for the Global Impact Investing Network on the research team there, which was the way that I learned so much about the whole space, which is a very diverse set of actors, from philanthropy to large-scale financial institutions to more boutique shops like ours. And then I started working in-house at one of the GIN's members called Nuveen, which is the asset management arm of TIAA, a large institutional asset owner and asset manager. And then after that, moved on to DWM, where I am now. So I've had the chance to see several different lenses on impact investing. And I think one of the things that keeps me passionate about it is seeing how all of these different actors come together in this space around common problems. And, they have different tools in their toolboxes. They have different kind of expertise and knowledge. And there's a lot of collaboration in the impact investing space, which is kind of one of the neat things about working in this area.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. So could you tell us in your current role, Hannah, what some of the more pressing challenges you're helping investors and companies navigate?
Yes, I think within impact investing, there is one overarching challenge in the space, which is how do you achieve meaningful impact alongside reasonable, competitive financial returns without compromising on one side or the other? And we do believe in our ability to do that and in bring in institutional capital into the impact investing space by being able to deliver on those promises. And so I think it is not always a challenge, right? Like sometimes you have those deals that really are hitting the mark solidly on both. And in other cases, it might be more of a portfolio approach where we have a very diverse set of portfolio companies that we're investing in. And in combination, they meet our impact objectives very well, and they also provide a really solid risk-appropriate level of financial return.
And you're right. I mean, that is when thinking about this space, that is definitely the push and the pull, or the one overarching challenge, as you said, right? And I guess there is often that debate about this balance between the financial returns and impact. And when you're speaking with investors, those that aren't maybe fully immersed in the space, how do you approach those conversations who just might be a little skeptical about the financial viability of impact-driven investments?
Yeah, I think the starting point is usually to understand where they're coming from and what their perspective is. Like, what do they understand as market rate returns? Because obviously, across different parts of the mainstream financial industry, there can be disagreement on what counts as a market rate return. And so kind of understanding the starting point, the benchmark that they're referring to, right? And then thinking about at a portfolio level for an asset owner, for example, where within your overall portfolio does this fit? Is it in the emerging markets bucket? Is it in kind of an impact carve out? Is it just within kind of an overall private credit bucket? I think that helps to locate where the skepticism or the questions are coming from and what kinds of requirements we will need to meet as an asset manager to fulfill the risk return profile that they're seeking. And then I think from there, part of the story is really about how a lot of these investments do have impact embedded in the business model in a way that means that if they are financially successful, they will also be successful at driving positive impact, as long as certain guardrails are in place around things like client protection, for example, and their ESG practices to make sure that they're behaving in a responsible way. But for example, if the business model is meeting the needs of an underserved group of consumers with really high quality services, and the more that target segment values your product, the more success you're going to have financially, I think that makes a lot of sense to people. And then also on the diversification point that I was making earlier in the conversation, we invest into primarily local financial institutions. And so underlying the loans that we would be providing to each financial institution are hundreds or thousands, in a couple of cases up to 1 million underlying loans of small scale entrepreneurs primarily. And so it's really a type of risk that's spread across all of those many, many people who are working hard and are generally, paying back their loans with a very high degree of fidelity. And so there's a few kind of key points, especially from our perspective, that we can make about the financial viability of our impact-driven investments.
Yeah, I'm sure it's just getting through that initial conversation. It sounds like some instances. So just kind of still on the business itself, impact considerations are becoming more integrated into private equity. I know you mentioned that you're in large part immersed with the private credit space and have done some private equity. But how have you seen investor attitudes towards impact evolve over the past few years?
Yeah, it's been so interesting. I would say, so I joined the GIN, or the Global Impact Investing Network, back in 2014. So it's been a little over a decade that I've been paying close attention to investor attitudes toward this space. And it's become so much more mainstream on the one hand, especially impact investing per se, for sure, but also the broader kind of sustainable investing, responsible investing set of approaches and tools has gained so much traction. And I think there's way more awareness and openness, less stigmatization of it as a kind of niche that doesn't apply, right? Of course, I'd be remiss not to mention that there's some backlash or skepticism, actually kind of from both sides of things. So on the one hand, people thinking that, or the perspective that ESG is not a viable way, ESG or impact investing are not viable ways to achieve solid financial returns. You have that perspective, but then you also have people who doubt the credibility of the impact that you can achieve. And so I think as an industry, we've had to almost fight back on both of those misconceptions. So it's a little bit of a battle on two fronts.
Yeah, thank you for that overview of the work. I guess I'm going to shift topics a little bit and ask you whether there are any female leaders in the impact space who have influenced or inspired you.
Yeah, definitely. To take it at a couple of different levels, I think it may by now be almost cliche, but the founder of Acumen Fund, Jacqueline Novogratz, wrote a book called The Blue Sweater that I read before I transitioned into impact investing from my international development career. And that really made a profound impact on my way of thinking. And she has done incredible work around really true impact-driven investing and has led the way in many ways. And so that's a kind of inspiration from afar. I think I've had closer women mentors who have also inspired me with their dedication and their leadership styles of many stripes. And so, one, while I was working at the GIN, Giselle Lung, who was officially my mentor there and has continued to be a mentor to me. And I think demonstrates a kind of really thoughtful and well-balanced approach to leadership. And then I'll also just mention that I worked under the head of responsible investing at Nuveen, who's Amy O'Brien. And I think that she has just been so persistent in shifting the way that one very large organization views responsible investing. And that has made a huge difference in probably not just that organization, but also a bit of leadership in the field as well. And so those are some of the women who've inspired me. I'm sure there are actually many, many more, right? But just to name a few.
Yeah. And The Blue Sweater, I read that book. It's fantastic. I would offer to anybody interested in learning more about the impact space to read it. It was an incredible read. Do you have any advice that you would give to women looking to build a career in impact investing or sustainable finance?
Yeah, I think one piece of advice would be to maybe identify a couple of the impact themes that you're personally passionate about. And that doesn't necessarily have to be in the international space. There's a lot here in the US related to, for example, affordable housing or even financial literacy and financial inclusion in the US. Or other things. There's obviously the entire environmental space around sustainable finance. And I mention that because I think it can be overwhelming in terms of the number of different themes and topics that are covered under this broad umbrella. And so it might be helpful to some people to pick a starting point that feels relevant and meaningful to you to start to learn about it. And then there are lots of ways that even if your job title doesn't directly have sustainable or impact in it, and you're working within a broader function, that you might be able to start getting involved in some of the projects or on the side types of things, volunteer activities or other ways of approaching this topic to start to build that. I think I have seen several people work their way from within into a role that has more to do with sustainable investing or impact investing.
Yep, very good. Are there any policies or initiatives that you'd like to see in private equity, private credit, to further support women in leadership, particularly within the impact space?
Yeah, I guess in general for women in leadership, I think that there's a bit of a tension with just very demanding jobs. And this is not even specific to sustainable or impact investing, but there's obviously a lot of times the dynamic where you have a really good top of the funnel, or let's say you're kind of junior and mid-level women. And then when it gets up to those leadership roles, either folks are self-selecting because it's too difficult to balance what they're trying to do outside of work and the demands of those jobs, or there's unconscious or conscious bias that weeds out women from leadership. And so I think some more intentional efforts to address do seem to pay off, either through efforts to recognize some of the unconscious bias and make sure that women are assessed on gender-neutral terms for leadership roles, or also to be able to build in the flexibility that they need just at certain points in their career to accommodate different roles that they have, because there's that tension. And not only for women, of course, when you implement these policies, they tend to benefit men as well. But it is about leveling the playing field there and ensuring that women could be successful. By the way, not about lowering standards, because I do think that people in general tend to perform really highly when they feel like they can have that balance. I don't always think that more hours put in equates to better results. And so shifting the thinking a bit around those kinds of things and being able to achieve some more balance, I think will benefit all kinds of leaders and also create the opportunities that women leaders need.
Great. Thank you for that. I guess just one final question for you is, as we're looking ahead into 2025 and beyond, are there any trends in the impact space, just broadly or not, that you'd like to note for us?
Yeah. So I think that the way that impact and sustainable investors will find the opportunity in this shifting landscape will be really critical to pay attention to and keep an eye on. Is an even greater need in the face of kind of the rollback of some publicly financed, let's say, kinds of programs and things to support social and environmental goals, not just in the US, but actually in Europe as well, across the world. There's an even bigger need for approaches through private capital. And I think there's a lot of opportunity in that as well. I think to give a more specific topic, something that we're paying attention to is the effects of climate change on vulnerable populations and ways that you can invest in solutions to mitigate those effects and build resilience for those communities. That is the big challenge there, is that it's highly localized. The kind of effects of extreme weather really depend on where you are. But I think some exciting opportunity that we're seeing emerge there is the use of technology, including AI, to predict and respond to some of those kinds of local weather events and things like that, and then be able to provide the appropriate preparatory services and financing, et cetera, for people who are, for example, about to by a flood, right? What do you do with your inventory? That kind of thing. So yeah, that's one kind of more specific theme that we're paying attention to, but I think it'll be interesting to see what else is born of this upheaval that we're going through in the moment.
That's great. Well, I thank you again. We're so thrilled you could join us and offer your insights into this space. It's evolving, as you noted, and we will be watching it closely and watching it develop. So thank you again for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Penny. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you for joining us at the table for this episode of Deal Us In. If you have a recommendation for an inspiring interviewee, a question you'd like us to ask, or topic you would like to hear covered, or if you'd like to tell us about women-focused initiatives in the field, please email us at wpef@McGuireWoods.com. We look forward to hearing from you. This podcast was recorded and is being made available by McGuireWoods for informational purposes only. By accessing this podcast, you acknowledge that McGuireWoods makes no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in the podcast. The views, information, or opinions expressed during this podcast series are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily reflect those of McGuireWoods. This podcast should not be used as a substitute for competent legal advice from a licensed professional attorney in your state and should not be construed as an offer to make or consider any investment or course of action.